Have you ever said something completely normal at work and then 5 seconds later thought, why did that sound so awkward? Maybe you sent an email and read it again 3 times. Maybe you were in a meeting and suddenly started saying like, you know, basically, or I mean, every few seconds. Or maybe you knew exactly what you wanted to say, but the moment you opened your mouth, your words came out uncertain, rushed, or overly complicated. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You can be incredibly good at your job and still sound unprofessional. Not because you're unintelligent, not because you don't know what you're talking about, and definitely not because you need to use bigger words. The problem is usually much simpler. You haven't learned how to make your communication match your competence. And once you understand the difference, something fascinating happens. People don't just hear you differently. They start treating you differently. Think about the last time you met someone who sounded calm, clear, and confident. They didn't need to dominate the room. They didn't need a fancy vocabulary. They could explain something complicated in a few simple sentences, and somehow you immediately trusted them. Now think about the opposite. Someone who constantly says, I'm not sure, but maybe I could be wrong. This might sound stupid. Even if their idea is brilliant, what happens? You start questioning the idea before you've even evaluated it. That's the power of communication. Your words don't just carry information. They carry a signal about how you see yourself. And today, I want to show you how to change that signal. Because sounding professional isn't about pretending to be someone you're not. It's about removing the little habits that accidentally make you sound less confident, less prepared, or less credible than you actually are. And the first one might be the biggest mistake you make every single day. You apologize before you speak. Think about how often you say things like, sorry, can I just ask something? Sorry, this might be a stupid question. Sorry, I just wanted to check it. Sorry for bothering you. Oh no, obviously, apologizing when you've actually made a mistake is healthy, but apologizing simply for taking up space, that's different. Imagine you're in a meeting and you have an important question. Instead of saying, can we clarify the deadline for this? You say, sorry, I just wanted to ask if that's okay. Do we maybe know when the deadline is? Look at what happened. The question was simple, but you wrapped it in hesitation. It's like putting a great idea inside 5 layers of bubble wrap. Nobody can see the idea clearly. So try something different. Remove the unnecessary apology. Instead of, sorry, can I ask something? Say, can I clarify something? Instead of, sorry, I just wanted to mention, say, I want to add something. Instead of, sorry, I might be wrong, say, here's how I see it. And notice the difference. You haven't become arrogant. You've simply stopped asking permission to exist in the conversation. And that distinction matters because confidence isn't always about adding more. Sometimes confidence is about removing what doesn't belong. But there's another habit that quietly destroys professional communication. You talk too much. And this one hurts because most people think talking more makes them sound smarter. It doesn't. Yeah. Imagine someone asked you a simple question at work. Why was the report delayed? You could say, the report was delayed because we were waiting for the final numbers from the finance team. We received them this morning, so I expect to have the report finished by 3. Clear, simple, professional. But maybe you panic because you feel like the answer's impressive enough. So you say, yeah, so basically what happened was, and we were kind of waiting on some numbers, and I think there was a little bit of a delay there. And obviously we wanted to make sure everything was correct before we sent anything over. So once we got those numbers, which actually came in this morning, we're now working on it. You said almost the exact same thing. But now the listener has to work to find your point. Here's the rule I want you to remember. Don't make people dig for your meaning. Give them the meaning first. This is one of the simplest ways to instantly sound more professional. Lead with the answer, then give the explanation. For example, instead of saying, I was thinking maybe we could possibly move the meeting because I have something else going on. Say, I'd like to move the meeting to Thursday. I have a scheduling conflict on Wednesday. We then stop. You don't need another 5 sentences to defend a reasonable request. This is where professional communication becomes almost like good architecture. Everything has a purpose. Nothing is there just because you were nervous about silence. And speaking of silence, let's talk about something that most people are terrified of. Pauses. Have you ever noticed that when you're nervous, your brain suddenly feels like a broken internet connection? You start speaking faster because you're afraid the other person will think you're unprepared. So you fill every tiny gap. Bum! Basically, like it? You know, yeah, but here's something interesting. A pause doesn't make you sound less intelligent. A pause often makes you sound more thoughtful. Think about a great speaker. They don't rush to fill every second. They let important ideas breathe. So the next time someone asks you a difficult question at work, don't immediately attack the silence. Take a breath, pause for 1 second, then answer. That tiny pause tells your brain, I don't need to react, I can respond. And that is a completely different mental state. Reaction is fast, response is deliberate. If you want to sound more professional, start slowing down just enough to let your thoughts arrive before your words do. But there's another problem that may be even more important. Your voice. You can use perfect words and still sound uncertain if your voice constantly goes upward at the end of your sentences. For example, I think we should launch it next week. I'll send the report this afternoon. We've already completed that. Everything sounds like a question, even when you're making a statement. And sometimes this happens because you're unconsciously looking for approval. You're not just communicating an idea, you're communicating, is this okay? So experiment with finishing your sentences with certainty. We should launch it next week. I'll send the report this afternoon. We've already completed that. You don't need to force your voice lower. You don't need to imitate a CEO. Just let your sentence finish. Because confidence in your voice doesn't come from sounding powerful. It comes from sounding settled. And there's a psychological reason this works. When your voice, words, and body all communicate the same message, people experience consistency. If your words say, I know the solution, but your voice says, please don't judge me, the listener notices the conflict. Your communication becomes stronger when your internal belief and external delivery line up. Now here's where things get really interesting, because sometimes the reason you sound unprofessional isn't the words you're using. It's the fact that you're trying too hard to sound professional. Have you ever seen someone use complicated language because they think it makes them sound intelligent? They'll say things like, we need to leverage our synergistic capabilities to optimize the implementation process. What does that mean? Probably something like, we need to work together and improve the process. Why use 10 expensive words when 5 ordinary ones communicate the idea better? Professional communication is not a vocabulary competition. It's a clarity competition. The smartest person in the room isn't necessarily the person who knows the biggest words. Sometimes it's the person who can take a complicated idea and make everyone else understand it. That's a real communication skill. So here's a challenge. For the next 7 days, whenever you're about to use a complicated phrase, ask yourself, can I say this more simply? Instead of utilize, say us.
Instead of who the event that,
say if. Instead of at this point in time, say no. Instead of I wanted to reach out to you in order to discuss, say I'd like to discuss. Simple doesn't mean childish. Simple means accessible. And when people understand you quickly, they experience you as capable. But there's one final habit I want you to pay attention to because it sits underneath almost everything we've talked about. Stop trying to sound impressive. Try to be useful. This changes everything. Imagine you're in a meeting and you're constantly thinking, do I sound smart? Do they like my idea? Did that sentence sound confident? What should I say next? You're no longer focused on the conversation. You're performing. And performance creates tension. Instead, walk into the conversation asking a different question. How can I make this clearer? How can I help? What does this person need to know? What is the most useful thing I can contribute? Suddenly, communication stops being about protecting your image. It becomes about creating value. And ironically, that's when you often sound the most confident. Think about a person who is genuinely good at something. They don't need to prove every 5 seconds that they're good. A great chef doesn't explain how talented they are while cooking. They just make the food. A great teacher doesn't constantly announce how intelligent they are. They make the complicated thing understandable. And a confident professional doesn't need every sentence to sound impressive. They make their message useful. That is the kind of person people remember. So the next time you're about to speak at work, don't ask yourself, how do I sound professional? Ask yourself, how can I make this clear? That's a much better question. And here's a simple exercise you can start today. Record yourself answering 3 ordinary workplace questions. What are you working on? What problem are you trying to solve? What do you need from the team? Answer each one in 30 seconds. Then listen to yourself. Don't judge your accent. Don't judge your personality. Listen for the habits. Do you rush? Do you repeat yourself? Do you say every few words? Do you apologize unnecessarily? Do you turn statements into questions? Do you use 10 words when 5 would work? This might feel uncomfortable. Good. Because awareness comes before improvement. You can't change a habit you can't hear. And here's the beautiful part. You don't have to fix everything at once. Pick one habit. Just one. Maybe it's removing sorry. Maybe it's slowing down. Maybe it's finishing your sentences. Maybe it's speaking more simply. Practice that one thing for a week, then add another, because becoming a better communicator isn't one giant transformation. It's hundreds of tiny adjustments that eventually change the way people experience you. And maybe you've spent years thinking, I'm just not good at speaking. Maybe you've watched other people walk into meetings and effortlessly command attention while you carefully rehearse your words in your head. Maybe you've wondered why people with less experience sometimes sound more confident than you. But I want you to understand something. Communication is not a personality trait. It is a skill, and skills can be trained. You don't need a different personality. You don't need a deeper voice. You don't need a bigger vocabulary. You don't need to become the loudest person in the room. You need clarity. You need intention. And you need the courage to let your words stand without constantly apologizing for them. Because the goal isn't to sound like someone else. The goal is to finally sound like the capable person you already are. So tomorrow, walk into work a little differently, speak a little slower, use fewer words, pause before answering, remove the unnecessary apology, finish your sentences, choose simple language, and most importantly, stop performing professionalism and start practicing clarity. Because when your communication becomes clear, people don't have to guess what you mean. When your voice becomes steady, people don't have to guess whether you believe yourself. And when you stop trying to impress everyone, you finally have enough attention left to actually connect with them. That's when communication changes. You stop sounding like someone who's trying to prove they belong, and you start sounding like someone who knows they do. Remember this, you don't become professional by sounding complicated. You become professional by making it easy for people to trust what you're saying. So the next time you open your mouth at work, don't try to sound smarter. Try to make the other person understand you, because clarity is confidence, clarity is credibility. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is simply what you mean.